All right, back again. Apologies in advance for my raspy voice. Unless you like it, then apologies for my regular voice and all the other episodes. A little bit under the weather, but I'm still putting this together for you people because I love you. Today, I want to talk about injuries. Specifically, I want to talk a little bit about where injuries come from, but more so the mindset around what do you do when you get injured? Like, what does the pathway forward look like? The gift of experience has afforded me both many injuries personally, but also the opportunity to work with a lot of people through injuries of various ways, shapes, and forms of degrees of injury. You know, I've worked with people with complete bicep ruptures and pec ruptures and hamstring ruptures and people who have gone through surgeries all the way down to, just basic pains and problems that arise from time to time. And I've also gone through a lot of that myself. I've had several muscle tears and problems. I've torn both pecs multiple times. I actually tore my left pec a couple of weeks ago. Not badly. I'm not talking about like full ruptures. Those little tears. I've torn both adductors multiple times. I've torn my rear delts. I've torn scalenes. I've torn labrums in both hips and had 3 surgeries on my hips. I've had a lot of problems and issues over the years as part of my lifting journey, and so I feel qualified to talk to you about injuries. So first stop is, of course, where do they come from? And I'm not a big proponent of this idea that injuries are random. In my anecdotal experience, my personal experience, both as a lifter and a coach, almost always there are signs or symptoms that an injury is coming if you know what to look for. I would say that injuries by and large are relatively predictable in our sport. And I say that in our sport because our sport is very predictable. This is not like gridiron or rugby where you're going to get tackled from any angle at an unknown time in an unknown place. You're standing in one place, moving up and down. You're lying in place, moving up a bar up and down. These are very, very predictable sporting pursuits that we do in the gym. And we have a great degree of control. We have a degree of control over our movements. We have a degree of control over our intensity, our recovery, over our programming. So injuries are far more predictable and controllable in what we do than in other sports. And so because of that, if we boil injuries right down, and I'm not a physiotherapist, I'm not some sort of doctor, I can't speak to this with absolute impunity. Again, I'm speaking from experience. But if we boil injuries right down, ultimately it comes when a tissue gets overloaded. And that is a very, very, very broad statement because overload can point to many different things. Because people will say, technique is not a cause of injury. It's not because of technique. Well, it can't be. Technique breaks down, an area of the body gets overloaded, and therefore something breaks. It can be a recovery issue. If you're under-recovered, well, then when you go to perform at the same intensity that you should be performing at, if you're fully recovered, you're relatively less recovered, there's relatively more load, et cetera, et cetera. So most things, recovery, technique, programming, most things that then equate to an injury point to overload in some way, shape, or form. Are there freak injuries? I would be wrong if I said no. There are injuries that seemingly come out of nowhere or are impossible to point to. Some people, I would say there's a genetic component as well. I like to look at the reverse as well. I believe that some people at the top are at the top as a result of being a little bit more genetically resilient to injuries. Some people just break much easier, it seems. There are other factors that can influence that for people as well. So what I really wanted to get across with that message is that we can have a fair idea of where injuries have come from and how they have presented. We can reverse engineer a lot of the time where injuries have come from. And we need to be good at doing that if we are going to prevent injuries from recurring in the future. And if we are also going to be able to spot this early in lifters to ensure that we can do our best to keep lifters injury free. And it's so, you're going to hear people talk about there's you can't prevent injury. I believe that you can't necessarily prevent it, but of course you can take the knowledge and the information that you have or that you've learned, either anecdotally or otherwise, and you can reduce injury risk. That's what this is about. It's about building a case to reduce injury risk. Anyway, let's talk about what happens when you actually get injured. And again, I've been through this many times. And so, if we're not talking about a more chronic, slow onset injury like a tendinopathy, for example, we're talking about like, bam, you put out your facet joint or you tear a muscle or something like that. This moment happens in your brain. There's an element of shock. There's an element of like, that's not good. That's not right. And then what happens afterwards happens depending on the kind of person that you are. But that moment is trauma. So like when you experience an injury, you are experiencing trauma. When you experience trauma, your brain is adapted. It's an amazing function of your body. It goes into hyperlearning. It takes in everything away around you times 10. It takes the whole, you get this heightened situational awareness because what your brain's doing is we need to soak up all this information because this is danger to our body. We need to learn this like crazy so that this doesn't happen again. Think of it in the simplest terms possible. You put your hand in a fire, it fucking hurts, you pull it out, your brain goes, you better remember that so when you see a fire again, you don't stick your hand in it. That's what it's doing. This is where post-traumatic stress comes from. Like think of someone at the most extreme level. Think of someone in a war zone. Their brain is constantly taking in everything around them. So they hear a loud noise. Their brain is telling them, bro, you're in danger. Get the fuck out of there. That's why it's so hard to get past. Anyway, your brain goes into hyperlearning. You're taking in everything. And this is an important aspect because if you're managing this on your own and you haven't experienced this before, what happens in these moments when you're in hyperlearning can really determine how hard it is to return to lifting. So essentially what I'm getting at is like, let's say you're doing a squat, pop, your adductor goes. In that moment, your brain is like ticking over 1,000 times that exact feeling, that exact moment. Guarantee when you start squatting again after the injury is healed, your brain is looking for that every single time. And anyone who has experienced an injury knows this. When you get back under the bar, your brain's just like, it's going to tear, it's going to pop. I know this feeling. This is bad. This is dangerous. This is scary. It takes a long while to get over that. So if you've got a good coach or you've been through this before, you get good at sort of training yourself into being like, okay, the injury's happened. I can't go back to that moment and take it away. It's done. Forget about it. Like we're at ground zero now. Pun intended. We are at ground zero. We're at ground zero right now. The time starts right now. We don't look back on what happened right now. Instead, we focus on what are the next steps? What do I need to do immediately? Do I need to go to the hospital? Do I need to, whatever you tend to do for an injury, ice this thing, raise this thing, relax, call someone to pick me up? Do I need to sit down and just chill and assess the damage for a second? What do I need to do right now? What are the immediate steps? Once you get through that initial process, it's like, okay, what are the next steps in terms of rehab and recovery? Who do I go see? How do I start the recovery process? Am I going to do anything different with diet, recovery? What is training going to look like? How does this impact my day-to-day life? It's very much keep your sights laser focused on what you can control in that moment. Because I guarantee you, all your brain wants to do is go backwards, is go, what did it feel like? What did I experience? How did I feel warming up in that session? And then it'll go back a step. How did I feel during that week? Did I sleep well that night? Why didn't I eat well the night before? Did I drink enough? Then it'll go back another week. Was I training too hard? Did I extend this block 1 week too long? Did I push the intensity in week 2 too hard? It'll just keep looking for things over and over and over and over again because that's what your brain does. Not just an injury, in any situation that you don't like, your brain will immediately look for someone or something to blame that often isn't you. Did my coach program me wrong? It's going to go there. Did my spotter grab the bar uneven and that caused me to load up on one side and then pop it when? Blame something or someone else. Not helpful. Doesn't change the situation that you're in. Doesn't change the torn adductor. Doesn't change the busted shoulder. Doesn't change any of that. Focus on, in the immediate term, what am I going to do to dig myself out of this? What are the processes and the steps that I need to take on my way to recovery? That needs to be the immediate focus to keep your head in the game, to keep moving forward. Because like when you've got downtime, you've also just got more time to think. And this gets worse the worse the injury is. If you're in the unfortunate position where you've torn something off and you immediately have to go to hospital and get it repaired, you got a lot of sitting around in a hospital by yourself to think about all the things that have gone wrong and all the problems that you're going to have and everything around that. So being able to rationalize and focus on what's important and how to move forward is going to be really important to keep yourself out of that funk, because you have no other option. You have to remind yourself of that every time. I tore my pec last 2 weeks ago. I have to remind myself, even though I've done it a million times, I have to not be down in the dumps, not be like, oh, I've torn my pec, it sucks, this is bad. Just be like, okay, it's done. It's done. Let's focus on getting better first. Once I get past that point, then we can do the next step. None of that stewing changes what happened, but I'm not saying that looking back is a bad thing, because that would contradict what I said earlier, which is there is some degree of predictability. Once you're past it, you're in that positive mindset, you're in that we're moving forward, we're getting better, we're going to get back on board. Once you're in that mindset, then you go back in time and you say, okay, let's assess things. Can I point to a definitive reason as to why this injury occurred? Like, is there something stark that stands out? So I'll give you an example. A few years ago, 2018, I had my third hip surgery. It was on my left hip. And because I'd been through 2 hip surgeries prior to that, I was very confident with returning to training. So after the first 2, which were within a month of each other, it took me about a year, well, it's just under a year. Like, that was sort of the start of 2015. I did my first competition, started 2016. So about a year to return to more strength than I had before. I PB'd on squats and deadlifts a year later. So it took me a year to be not just back to full strength, but beyond. This third surgery, I was like, well, I feel like I got under the bar later than I needed to. I feel like I could get there sooner. So I started the training process early, and it was fine. Like, I didn't have any issues with the hip itself, but because of the process of when you get an injury like this, have a surgery, you get some, muscle loss, and things aren't fully functional on that side for a little while. I was really loading into the right side, and during that prep for a competition, I tore my right adductor. And so I could look at that definitively and be like, okay, well, I can clearly see I'm loading into the right side. I know a few months prior to that, 6 months prior, I'd had a surgery. I'm avoiding my left side, loading into the right side. That side got overloaded. Could clearly point to a thing that's like, this is the reason I got injured in that case. Sometimes it's not as straightforward. Sometimes you need to look at things and be like, okay, well, what did the programming look like? What did the recovery process look like? Was I dieting? Was there a change in medications, or if you're using performance-enhancing drugs, a change there? Was it an issue with life stress, with work stress, with sleep? Was it something that I can control or that I can't control? Was it a programming issue? Was it a technical issue? And normally you can boil it down to something, or you can look at it like, okay, I was getting this consistent knee pain for quite a while that I was just medicating, and I was just ignoring, and then pop, my quad tendon went. Okay, now I know in the future, if I'm getting a persistent pain, I'm not going to ignore that pain. You go back and you look for that data. You can't always find it. Sometimes you can't find it. I've had to lift a completely rupture a pec. Technique was immaculate. Programming was very sound. No unreasonable amount of pressing. Doing bench twice per week, and no unreasonable amount of extra pressing. Diet was fantastic. Sleep was a priority. It's kind of just a freak thing. It was a relatively unpredictable thing. And don't get me wrong, there's a reason there. What I'm saying is, it's not always straightforward as to what the reason is. Sometimes the reason might be under the surface that you don't even realize, or that is impossible to assess for. So we look for a reason, and we do our best to find that reason. If you can't find the reason, there's not much you can do about that. Maybe you can write it off as a freak thing, but almost always you can find some sort of reason. If not, you can at least be hypersensitive to certain things around it. Like, for example, the persistent pain. Was there any warning sign whatsoever? If so, can we look for that? What is the process going to be like in terms of building confidence back for this person? There's at least something that you can do. However, in my experience, those are unicorns. Almost always there's something that you can point to. I tell you the worst ones. The worst ones, the worst ones are the people that are like, and this is not my, this is like external view. The worst ones are the people that are like, deadlifting with a rounded back is not going to cause a back injury. Those people are the ones that have the most frequent back injuries because they're the ones that have been taught that for whatever reason. And I don't want to go into the argument of rounded versus straight backs and deadlift and back risk and all this sort of stuff. But the people that are making no discernible change to how they lift and they're objectively lifting like shit, and they're like, why do I keep getting hurt? Well, maybe there's something to that. This is the thing as well. Injury can change some stuff. Let's say you've always lifted with a relatively gross technique. You can't necessarily just blame technique, but technique, movement has a lot to do with pain. In my vast experience, there's so much. I would say like 99% of the time, the way you move and pain is almost directly related. Almost always directly related. Not always, but almost always. And the thing with injury is like maybe the way that you've always lifted was problematic and there was some sort of tipping point that created it problematic to the point where it actually caused an injury to occur. And that's a really hard pill to swallow. So let's say you've always deadlifted with like a horrifically rounded lower back. And for whatever reason, whether it's like your programming's changed, you've gotten stronger to the point where the load is concerning, you've lost position to the point where you were already in a volatile position, but teetering on the edge of safe or not safe, and then pop, there it goes. Sometimes you have to swallow the pill of what you were doing before is now no longer an option, and you have to change what you were doing to not be stuck in that particular point. And I feel this. It's a hard thing to go through. I've had to change my stance numerous times over the years because of the issues with my hips. I've had to change my grip on bench numerous times over the years because of issues with my pecs. So like, it can be a tough one to go through, is like recognizing, okay, well, I don't want to let my ego get in the way in terms of this is how I've always done it, therefore it must be right. Once an injury occurs, the game slightly changes. You have to be hypersensitive to that injury and be willing to change things to ensure that it doesn't recur. Be willing to change that you are not, to accept that you are not bulletproof, that you are not a miracle man or woman or person. So yeah, the injury can change things. All right. So reflecting after the injury has sort of started that healing process is important. The last two things I want to talk about, don't be dumb with it. Like I was talking to someone in here the other day, just talking like this person was warming up and they had a sore back, and I'm like, don't be a hero, don't push through it. Be honest with yourself. If the pain is too much, just pull out of the session. It's no big deal. And he made a comment around of like, maybe I just need to harden the fuck up. I'm like, maybe, but maybe you've actually got an injury that you need to consider. And I really respect the attitude of like, just harden the fuck up, in the sense that I know what it's like, and I can tell you as a lifter that was always that. This is kind of dumb to injury, and literally just dumb to it. Like I was hurt and I'd be like, surely there's a way I can do things to not hurt, or surely I can just grit through this. Like it's just pain. What does pain mean? Well, pain means something sometimes. Pain means, hey, it's your body telling you don't do that fucking thing. And I'll be the first to admit I've pushed through pain far too much in my lifting career, and I genuinely believe that if I had the right guidance and the right understanding and the right knowledge around pain and injury in my early days, I would have ended up as a much better powerlifter than I did. I was too tough for my own good. And that's not an ego thing. It's just like I was too tough, and it's a bad thing. I wish I wasn't. I'm not saying I'm a super tough dude. I'm just saying I didn't care about injuries when I got hurt in lifting. Nothing was going to stop me. And I'm still a little bit like that. I've just learned over the years, okay, well, if that rep felt funny, guarantee the next one something's going to tear. So just stop now. Don't test it. In the past, I was dumb. I was just like, just test it. Don't do that. And so the same thing can be said when it comes to returning from an injury. Because a lot of the times, and again, I've been through this myself. When I did my first ever injury, I was warming up. I was doing my opener test for nationals in 2012 in a commercial gym. The dumbbell rack was right next to the squat rack. Someone reached in to put a dumbbell back, hit the bar while I was squatting 220. I twisted it. I tore my adductor. I didn't know what a muscle tear was. I didn't know what it felt like. Didn't even know it existed. I'd never heard of someone tearing a muscle at that point, I don't think. I didn't know what a physio did. I'd never been to one. So I was just like, my leg hurts. I was like, can I squat? Well, yes, it just really hurts. So I just squatted on it anyway. And then what I would do is be like, well, I did nationals, got it out of the way. I probably need to rest this thing. So rest, test it each week. Be like, oh, it feels a bit better. Let's just go heavier. Bam, tore it again. Did the same thing twice. So re-tore it like 2 times, waiting a couple of weeks, going too heavy, waiting a couple of weeks. If I'd just seen someone, they would have said, here's the rehab. Here's the time it's going to take. Here's how you're going to ease back in slowly. I wouldn't have gone through that process so many times. And so when you get hurt, don't try and figure it out yourself. Something that might be a 3-week job could turn into a 3 or a 6 month job by you fucking around trying to figure out what the hell is going on. Just go see someone who knows. Go see a good physiotherapist. The key things you're looking for from a physiotherapist as a lifter or as a coach, if you're coordinating with one, is what can you not do? What should you avoid at the moment? Like, don't go in there expecting them to fix your injury. That's not their job. Their job is to find the source of the pain and to provide you with a pathway, a rehab pathway to get back to being pain-free. The big difference is pain-free doing your chosen activity doesn't take into account the load. So like, if you have back pain doing a deadlift, their job is to get you deadlifting the empty bar pain-free. They've done their job if they've done that. It's a very big difference between deadlifting the empty bar and deadlifting 300 kilos. So take it slow, shoot lower than the physio recommendations. That's always my recommendation to anyone. If they say it's going to take 10 weeks, give it 14 weeks. Give yourself a bit of insurance. Give it a little bit longer, because no one has a crystal ball. No one can see inside your body. No one can assess the healing process fully with a microscope along the way. Just talk to a profession. Take it slow. Don't be in a rush. That's my last point ultimately. If you get hurt, don't be in a rush to return. Again, having gone through surgeries, having taken lifters through complete ruptures and surgeries and all that kind of stuff, the 8-month rehab process will go past in a flash. It will go past so fast. In the early stages, it won't feel like that. But when you get past it, you're like, holy shit, that went really quickly. Like 10 weeks is a very short period of time. And if you measure it in terms of your lifting career, just ask yourself the question in the moment. Am I quitting lifting tomorrow? No. Do I have plans to quit lifting? No. Well, then what's the rush? You've got the rest of your, like 1 year and a 20-year career of lifting. There's nothing. So like, and if anything, most of the time, if you actually do a lot of the things that I'm talking about here and learn and grow from the injury, the process of injury becomes a gift. It forces you to focus on the minutia that is imperative in making long-term process, in refining technique, in being more thoughtful around programming and around feeling in your body and around recovery processes and around looking after yourself. That sets you up for the best path forward of longevity. It gives you a learning opportunity to make you a better lifter. It can be a gift if you know what to do with it. Anyway, hope that helped. Let me know what you want to hear me talk about. My voice is officially cooked. I'm done. Goodbye.